Okay. Okay. Well, good morning. I'm very, very happy to be here. I'm going to be talking about the presence of an issue that I like to call post-tonality in 4 pieces by New Zealand composers. Again, as in the case of Chris, recent is a very loose term. But what I mean with post-tonality is the use of tonal materials out of their context. I'm talking about deconstructing octaves, scales, consonances or triads, and use them in a new context. I would like to start by playing 12 bars of Tone Clock Piece number 2 by Jenny MacLeod. Mostly what happens here is atonal expectations are set, and then they are interrupted and frustrated by the presence of tonal elements, such as octave duplications or melodic octaves. Let's get into some detail. What happens first is, the first thing I notice is that the first chord seems to set atonal expectations, as I said. Pitch set C sharp, F sharp, G sharp, A, E flat, seems to announce the kind of music in which there will be constant pitch change and progress through the whole chromatic scale. But then what happens in, so that's the first chord, right? But then what happens in bar 3 is first we have 2 new pitches, E and B, but then immediately we have a return to the 5th G sharp, which was the initial at the beginning of the piece, and then we have the duplication of A and E flat. I would say that's a harmonical frustration of the expectations of the atonal ear. Then we have another similar situation, more of a melodic kind. The tritone F sharp C is so idiosyncratic of atonal music, or at least of the more orthodox. We almost would think that very typically it will be completed by a B, forming the pitch connection tritone plus perfect fourth. But what happens then is a melodic octave, and then the pedal is lifted. That's a melodic octave. Then the pedal is lifted, and C appears again, as if momentarily attention would like to be put on that note C. I would call that a melodic frustration of the expectation of the atonal ear. Then it finally seems that the music will move forward, and we have G and D. So we think that finally we will be progressing through the whole of the chromatic scale, and the next thing that happens is that E flat is duplicated one more time, right? It's a duplication of the E flat A appearing on the left hand. Another harmonic frustration of the atonal expectation of constant change. One last comment. It's interesting to compare bar 1 and bar 12. They have the same pitch content, but E flat is respelled as D sharp, as is suggesting that the alternation of varied repetition with spurts of miscellaneous material, some of it atonal sounding, some of it tonal sounding, proposes to the listener a new perspective on the same material, exactly the same material. So I think that this pitch connection sounds atonal, but then the same pitch connection, of course with A duplicated, I don't know, to me at least sounds like an F sharp minor chord. One reason I think is the duplication of the A, right? I think our tonal memory processes that duplication as something that reinforces the root of the chord, F sharp, in a chord that is in first inversion. A very strong tonal reference. In summary, I think it's a piece that sets atonal expectations, and those atonal expectations are interrupted by the presence of tonal materials. The opposite, I think, happens in Jack Body's three rhythmics. The second movement starts with a very clear establishment of consonance. And then we'll see that that consonance is interrupted. The piece then starts with broken octaves, followed by a duplication of E over many octaves apart. Then we have a perfect fifth, which then will become B minor, a B minor sonority. Then that is followed by a quite unstable pitch collection, A, B flat, F, G, A flat, all of that with pedal, right? That leads to another triad, E and E flat minor triad in the second inversion, and that is interrupted again by a more chromatic idea, the augmented octave D flat D. We're dealing then with the opposite, right? With a consonant is set, and then more chromatic pitch collections. Almost, I like to say, stain that constant feeling of consonance. A characteristic, which I think is also a sign of tension between tonal and atonal expectations, is the appearance of what I like to call anchor pitches, which are notes that are repeated more often than others. Notice those Ds in the first phrase, they are repeated in different octaves, so we're dealing again with duplication. And those anchor pitches then are also repeated quite often in the following phrase, establishing long distance connection between different phrases. That is balanced at the same time by the fact that every phrase displays the 12 notes of the chromatic scale. Not in there's nothing serial about this, but I think each tendency neutralizes each other. Let's hear how that sounds. The music will not sound tonal for a lot of years, but we can't say that it sounds atonal either. There's just too much consonance. In summary, then, the opposite that happened in Jenny MacLeod happens in Jack Body. Consonant expectations are set, and they are interrupted by the presence of very chromatic material. In the third movement, there's also plenty of octave duplications and the use of triadic language. But the way the piece is constructed is very interesting. Part 2 consists of nothing but the repetition of the same 27 notes. It's a tone row. The first 12 notes is actually a very typical tone row with no pitch being repeated. Part 1 is made up out of the intervallic inversion of that 27 tone row. And the resulting harmonies are restricted to quartal harmonies. That first chord is nothing but the inversion of B, E, A. Then we have the more atonal sounding pitch collection, perfect fifth plus minor second, which permeates the whole movement. Then, for instance, we see that there's a minor triad. Everything else in that line is one of those three options, and the last thing that happens is a major triad. There are plenty of them. So the innovative or particular thing about this movement is that there's a lot of consonants, but there's relationships such as tonic dominant or any sort of typical tonal relationship about dissonances is avoided by simply controlling everything serially. Let's hear a little bit of that. omitting some of the part 1 pitches. In the next piece, by Sudarshan Sivaramakrishnadas, I just want to mention about this piece. It uses throughout the whole piece octatonic scale, but I think the way he has used a conventional resource is very innovative, and the innovation comes from the use of a periodical appearance of the different elements. That is an excellent way to disguise tonal harmonic stasis and create the illusion of motion. What you're seeing there is the 10 different elements that are combined in many different possible ways in the right hand. These elements are combined to create chunks of 14 bars. Now, there is an interesting balance between change and repetition. Bars 2, 4, and 10 consist on exactly the same order of elements in right hand. I think those repetitions are very cleverly displayed. There's no way when we hear this, the rapid rate of change will allow us to have the memory of those repetitions. I think they are very well disguised. In some other cases, bars 1 and 5 are almost exactly the same music, except for 2 elements which are switched. This is how this music sounds. Interplay is in between the pitches G, B flat, and B natural, and because they are duplicated, it sort of reinforces G as a tonic. Secondary in importance is C sharp, which only appears on right hand. The role of this note seems to be to interrupt that process of tonicalization, and then F in left hand punctuates short segments inside every chunk of 14 bars. But the most remarkable aspect, I think, is the avoidance of the use of A flat until bar 8, moment at which the A flat seems to punctuate the entrance of that melody which progresses at much slower rate. We have then the use of a conventional resource, the octatonic scale, by the way, is the scale G, E, F, G, A flat, B flat, B natural, C sharp. But the subtle use of aperiodicity generates something quite innovative. The last piece I wanted to refer to is a very remarkable piece by Alex Taylor called Phaetonality, in which I think this issue of what I call post-tonality is approached with a very radical view. At the beginning, the piece is nothing but triads on one hand and then serial procedures on the other one. The triads acting as parentheses in between the exposition of serial material. This is how the piece starts. But not always the triads appear at the end. In phrase 2, they appear in the middle of the process, and the interesting thing is that in the end both processes stop and they generate a B major, if we respell the last chord, a B major chord with a major 7th. Interesting formal processes. At the end of the first third of the piece, those triads are not anymore punctuations. In this example, the triads are combining hexachords, and they become a phrase by itself. And the intervallic context is very, very varied. At the end of the second third of the piece, for the first time, there's a more active interaction between the two elements. But the way the elements interact is not generating any synthesis, but rather a collision of almost irreconcilable elements. This is how that sounds. I would say that Alex Taylor's approach is there's a skeptical view, I think, on the possibility of compromising, or maybe on the desire of conciliating or compromising the two elements. I think he sees tonality as an element that only can be surrounded by the serial elements, but both elements cannot merge. The title suggests that it is tonality as a fatal force that once it is introduced in the piece, it cannot be influenced, but at the same time, you can't get away from it once you introduce it. Then you must do something with it. He included a poem written by him at the beginning of the score, and the last two lines are, "You can't get in, but you can't get out." And I think that reflects his view on the use of tonality in an atonal context. I would like then to make two final remarks about all what I said. It seems to me that in the early 1900s, atonality had the role of challenge the expectations of the tonal ear, right? And things that were becoming predictable. And it seems to me that now many composers, already for many decades already, are interposing consonants in the midst of an atonal fabric, compositional fabric, a little bit to avoid things that maybe in those composer views are becoming predictable in the pitch language, in atonal pitch language. So the open question I would like to leave is it possible that by continuing recombining these elements and by creating not only relationships in the microscopic aspect of a piece among pitches, which is, it seems to me, one aspect of a lot of atonal music, but macroscopic aspects, things that will maybe resolve as the piece goes in a broad formal arch of a piece. Well, this leads to new meaningful relationships among elements in composition, and I wonder if it will have as a result that some typical materials, sonic materials, will be liberated from their historical burden. Will be able to compose meta-historic music? That's my question. Of course, I realize that all what I'm saying has not been said for the first time here. This has been going on for a long time. So the final question is also, is this debate over, like a lot of new music debates? Or is it just starting? And I suggest that we don't have the historical perspective yet to know the answer to that. I would like then to finish this lecture by playing the very end of Alex Taylor's Fatonality, in which massive chords then lead to yet an unanswered question. Thank you.